respond to the first part of your question first. Is the I am ever enriched, or by implication diminished, by experience? So imagine you were a 5-year-old boy and you are playing in your garden, and you say, I am aware of the trees, I am aware of my parents, I am aware of the feeling of hunger, I am cold, or whatever. But if you had, at that time in your life, withdrawn your attention from all the qualities that defined what you essentially are, seeing the trees, being cold, being hungry, being tired, and just given your attention to the experience I am, before it was qualified by experience. And you took a sample as a 5-year-old boy of that simple experience I am. Imagine you could package it, you put it in an envelope, you put it in your drawer. And now, in this moment, you take another sample of the experience I am. And then you take the 5-year-old sample, the example of the 5-year-old boy, out of storage, and you compare the two experiences of I am. Innumerable experiences have passed between these two samples. But has the experience I am changed or been aggrandized or diminished in any way in the intervening years?
Perhaps not, but can we recognize that there are beings whose I am is immense? As it's said in a tradition, Abraham was not a single man, he was a nation.
He was?
A nation.
Yes.
So there are differences in being localized in individuals.
I would say, and this may be a difference in our traditions and in the way we're using language, but I would say there weren't different I ams, there weren't different, I would say there is a single I am, there is a single being. There are not numerous beings. There is a single, infinite, self-aware being, referred to as God in the religious traditions, referred to as consciousness, referred to in common parlance as I. Now, the difference between Abraham's experience and most people's experience is that the I am, the self that each of us feels ourselves to be, is mixed with and therefore apparently limited by experience. So the I am, what I am for most people, seems to be very small. It just seems to refer to this little corner of experience called my thoughts, my sensations. So for most people, the experience I am is limited to a single body. Now, I would suggest that this image, when you said Abraham was not a person, he was a nation, is a poetic and a beautiful way of suggesting that the experience of I am that shone in Abraham's mind had been relieved of the limitations that most people superimpose on their own being. So Abraham experienced the fullness of being in himself, represented here as being a nation rather than a person, an ocean rather than a lake. But that the I am that Abraham felt as himself, and the I am that most people feel as themselves, is the same I am, relieved of its limitations in Abraham's case, and still apparently limited in most people's case, but nevertheless the same I am, shining in and as the essence of each of ourselves.
so the experience of I am can grow. Let's say that 5-year-old had a pure experience of I am, and another person who has lived like a Martin Luther King, let's say he had the same experience of I am. There seems to be a difference, possible difference in scale.
Yes, okay.
I am.
Again, I think this is to do with our two different ways of formulating this, but I would say that the I am doesn't grow. It is always the same size, and in fact it has no size, it is infinite. But the I am can be relieved of apparent limitations. When before this building was put up, the space that is contained within it was the same single space that is the space of the universe. When this building was put up, that space seemed to be limited by the 4 walls of this room. The space in this room seemed to acquire the limitations of the walls of this room. In other words, it seemed to become temporary and small and located. But if we were to take a sample of the space in this room and a sample of the space out in the world, they would have the same qualities. And when this building is one day taken down, the space in this room won't suddenly expand or unite with the space in the universe. It was never separate from it. It never had its own identity. So whilst it is true that this space seems temporarily to be limited, and when this building is taken down, it will be relieved of those limitations. We cannot say that the space in this room will grow or expand or unite with the greater space. So in most people's case, their own being is something small, something finite, something limited. The first endeavor, to go back to your original questions, I would say there were 2 aspirations. And the first aspiration is to see our being as it is, prior to its apparent limitation by experience. That, I would say, was the first and the highest endeavor that a human mind can engage in, to recognize its essence as it is. And then the second endeavor, going back to our previous conversation, would be to lead a life that is consistent with that recognition of what we essentially are.
What kind of life would that be?
It would be a life when I was in boarding school in England, from the ages of 8 to 13, we used to go to chapel every night, every Sunday night. Chapel every day, but chapel every Sunday night. And there was a particular hymn that we sang every night, every Sunday night for 5 years. And the words went something like this: God be in my eyes and in my seeing. God be in my ears and in my hearing. God be in my nose and in my smelling. God be in my mouth and in my speaking. God be in my heart and in my understanding. It would be that kind of life.
Thank you.